Hello, and welcome to the latest show from the HRC, a program from the Township of Lower Merion's Human Relations Commission. I'm Harold Goldner, chair of the commission, and my guest today is Randy Duque, who is the acting executive director of the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. His responsibilities there cover a wide range of issues and areas, including civil rights, immigrant and refugee issues, victim services, anti-violence initiatives, community police relations, conflict intervention, and issues relating to changing neighborhoods. Randy, you and I have been working together with the Tri-States Human Relations Coalition, that group of city, county, state, and federal human relations organizations for more than 6 years now. And you've just taken on this new role at the Philadelphia HRC. I'm delighted that you took time out to sit down with us today. Can you talk to me about what your current position is at the Philadelphia Human Relations Commission and what that commission does?
Sure. So yes, as when we first met about 6 or 7 years ago, something like that, I was the deputy director in charge of one of our divisions, and just recently in December, uh, was brought on to be the acting executive director um, for the whole both Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations and our Fair Housing Commission in Philadelphia, which is housed under the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. So, like, essentially, my current position is essentially an administrator to ensure that the mission of the PCHR is carried out to the fullest, and in terms of protecting the
Protected classifications.
yes.
Right. I was going to get to what
Yeah.
that meant.
Yeah. So our protected class is essentially to uphold the civil rights laws in Philadelphia. Um,
And Philadelphia has always had a really broad umbrella of class of people, of protected classifications for a while. I mean, if I recall, Philadelphia was protecting LGBTQ rights long before anybody else was. Isn't that right?
yeah, that's all right. Yeah, Philadelphia is well. First of all, we're the oldest municipal agency that was set up specifically to enforce civil rights laws. Whereas there's other ones that were like, for example, LA County HRC was about like 1948. I think they say they were started. A lot of these other ones came from a labor relations background. Ours, the PCHR, was as actually established in 1951, like again solely for the protection of civil rights and moving forward. So since 1951, you know, Philadelphia gained more protections, as you sort of mentioned, LGBT being one of the ones early on before other municipalities and across the state would. So whereas, on the federal and state level, you have about 8 or 9 protected categories, Philadelphia has actually about like 19 plus a couple other protections that we do in the city.
I mean, that was 13 years before the Civil Rights Act that Philadelphia had a commission going.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely.
And also, it's the commission that's involved in things like ban the box legislation and mandatory sick leave and family leave, isn't it, in Philadelphia, as opposed to state laws that provide for that?
Right. So you mentioned ban the box, or like the technical term is the Fair Chance Hiring Act. Um, you also, yes, in terms of protected sick leave for victims of domestic violence, and also just recently we also picked up enforcement for a bill that was recently signed on residential wholesalers. Essentially, you have it's essentially the whole we buy homes, um, um, you know, I don't want to say scheme, but I mean that whole aspect of trying to reduce the number of sort of like predatory buying of homes, um, you know, from people who would essentially be middlemen to or middle people to sell to developers for profit, buy it cheap from a resident, and then just sell it, like without really the resident really having being informed of at this point what their rights are in terms of being a resident and being essentially harassed So this is a new one that like we're going to start protecting. Actually, that went into effect in beginning of February. Uh, so we're working with our licensing to essentially establish uh, regulations on what those protections would look like.
Yeah, and I think the other thing legislation and laws like that protect is situations where you have sort of creeping gentrification, where neighbors who live in an area would like their, their kids to settle down in that area, or their family, bring their extended families in and maintain the neighborhood environment there. And what happens is, before they even know a house is for sale, it's snatched up, and then a block of houses is for sale. And the next thing these people know, they're living in a gentrified neighborhood, and either their rent forces them out, or their real estate taxes force them out, or essentially what happens is the developers, by developing that way, force them out of the environment. So legislation like this is very important for maintaining the neighborhood characteristic of a lot of places.
That's
Um,
exactly.
right. Okay. I know, because we've actually, we here at Lower Merion have at some meetings have discussed that sort of thing, um, the possibility of that sort of thing happening right here in Lower Merion Township. So I think that's an
Mm.
important piece. Randy, you have, and we talked about this, you have a fascinating background that you bring with you to the Philadelphia Commission. I understand you have a master's degree in conflict resolution, and you've even taught for Temple University. Um, but you also spent 10 years in the Army National Guard, and I know you have some experience, and you teach martial arts. From my perspective, military, martial arts, conflict resolution, how does that work? How do you do that?
Well, so I guess I should give you a little quick story about how I actually came into the field.
Please.
My my undergrad was I was actually originally a pre-med major, or I was a pre-med track biology major at Temple University. I did that for most of my time as an undergrad, and I realized that like that wasn't my thing, and I ended up switching to anthropology with a focus on culture because I really like that. When I graduated, um, I decided to teach English in South Korea. So I moved to South Korea for a little over a year teaching that with the intention of coming back, getting my master's degree, and going back there. Came back here, had to make money, so got a job teaching, but then decided to go back to school. Found a degree at Temple University's School of Medicine in Communication Sciences and Culture. Applied for that, got accepted, and next thing I know, they said we don't have culture and communication, but we have conflict, and we think we would be good at that. So they kind of got tricked into this. Loved it, what I was studying. Loved it, learning about culture and communication and conflict. And then I basically said, what do I do with this? And I was recommended that to look at a local mediation center here in Philadelphia, the Good Shepherd Mediation Program, where I ended up getting an internship, and then when I graduated, there happened to be an opening. Got that job experience, um, running juvenile diversion programs, developing trainings, etc., and doing all sorts of related conflict related trainings and workshops, and then, like you said, teaching at Temple, all this rich experience. And in the field, they talk about being a conflict resolution specialist. And during my time at Good Shepherd, I did like some stuff in an international level, and I noticed working on an international conflict level, there's a lot of interface with the military. With that said, I remember being in the Philippines at a conference and seeing a human rights attorney teaching conflict resolution to Marines out there. And I noticed that the Marines were not taking him seriously at all. And I'm thinking, at that point, I thought, it kind of all solidifies. Like, I really need, if I want to call myself a conflict resolution specialist, I really need to know the gambit of it. I was already studying and teaching Kung Fu, so I knew that. But I also like, if I want to understand what I'm working with, I have to be part of it. So that's when I decided to enlist in the military. And since I already had a career going, I went with a Army National Guard, so I can still keep my day job, and then sort of go go into that craft. I decided to go enlisted in infantry, well, because I basically wanted base understanding. Um, so I did that. Loved the experience. Really, it was weird being about the same age as my drill sergeant that's going through in the beginning, but it's an experience that I really found enriching. That really did help me out in terms of understanding um, and also the military side of things, but also being able to build connections where you have sort of a preconception that, oh, conflict resolution, that's something that's it's, I guess, so not tangible, especially to someone who were coming from like a combat background or something.
So I guess we could say you really got into the trenches on conflict resolution, as it were, being in the infantry. And you mentioned Good Shepherd. Good Shepherd is pretty much the gold standard in mediation training in the greater Philadelphia area. I know I've thought about taking that training, but it's like 3 days long. It's a spectacular program.
Yes, yes, the basic mediation training, yes, is a 24-hour training, and you're right. The key point to it is because there's a lot, you learn the core of it, but then you have a lot of time to practice it, so you get to experience it in the beginning.
All right, we'll come back to that, but we have to take a break right now. We will be right back with more from the HRC with the Acting Director of the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations, Randy Duque, after these messages. We are back from the HRC. I'm speaking with Randy Duque, Acting Director of the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. When we left off, we were talking about the process of mediation and Good Shepherd mediation, which is really excellent training. The Lower Merion Township Human Relations Commission has, unlike a lot of local HRCs, township HRCs, the power to take complaints, investigate, and adjudicate. A lot of township mediate, investigate, adjudicate. A lot of township HRCs only mediate, and then they sort of kick the complaint along or down the path. Philadelphia is quite different in terms of what it can do. Can you talk with us about why and how Philadelphia is different in what your commission is able to do?
Sure. As I had mentioned, since Philadelphia had been established in the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter back in 1951, it's definitely an established agency that's similar to Lower Merion and is able to enforce the civil rights laws for the city. We are also, being a city agency, do have a dedicated staff, albeit a little small for a city agency, of about 30 people or so, who investigate claims of discrimination in workplace, public accommodations, and housing under, like I said, those 17 to 19, depending, plus protected categories. And then also a non-enforcement side, which works with community relations. And then there's the fair housing unit. But like, we are different in that way, that we do have this established, staff that can do all the investigations, and also appointed commissioners who would, hear cases of probable cause. But along the way, there are different variations. Like, we do have a compliance mediation track too for parties to try to resolve their dispute before it goes to commissioner if probable cause is found.
Your commission has been involved in community relations activities, which I think take it outside the model of somebody files a complaint, the commission mediates, and if it can't resolve it, investigates and adjudicates. You're sort of being proactive, or you're capable of being proactive. And in fact, your role before you took on the role as acting director was the community relations piece, wasn't it?
That's correct. Yes.
Can you tell us about that piece of it?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, the non-law enforcement side of the Commission on Human Relations, Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations, is our community relations division. So that was where I headed up that division, and actually, I think part of the reason why I got the job was, as we talked about previously, was about my background in conflict resolution, and doing a lot of work in terms of training, development, and training itself. So the community relations division, we essentially try to help resolve community disputes, community tensions, neighbor disputes before they rise to the level of violence. A lot of times people will call the police because of an issue they're having with their neighbor, or maybe there's a tension that's rising in the community, but there's really nothing that law enforcement can do because nothing criminal had happened, or there's just not enough to do anything further than just write down a complaint. So we try to get involved. We get involved and try to mediate those disputes, but also try to be proactive too, which is where we go out into the community, work with different various community groups, churches, etc., to deliver trainings in conflict resolution, bias awareness, and like things that will try to give people ways and knowledge and skills to try to resolve their disputes themselves, before things get worse. And then, when there are, like I mentioned, about community tensions, the entire commission our commissioners have gotten involved at times. For example, by holding public listening sessions. One of their prior to coming to the commission, I remember while I was a Good Shepherd testifying at one of these PCHR hearings, when there was a huge about 10 or 12 years, 10 plus years ago, there was basically racism against Asian students in South Philly High School, and which led to it was like basically violence against Asians in the schools, which led to the Asian students walking out, essentially, having a protest about the conditions and in the school with respect to violence to them. So the PCHR had held regional hearings, which culminated in a report with recommendations. The report's called Widening the Circle, and I believe it's still accessible. If you just Google Widening the Circle in Philadelphia, you'll find that.
And how did the hearings help resolve, or did the hearings help resolve the tensions? What other things was the commission involved in that helped resolve tensions?
So the part of the hearings were to basically get the stories of conditions in terms of students' safety and the way students felt. So and then also testimony from people like parents, from people who work with youth, and then basically made recommendations of how to improve the school system. So in some senses, it was useful because it brought a wide breadth of stories from across the city. And if you know Philadelphia is essentially a bunch of neighborhoods strung together to make a city. So there's very unique problems in different schools and such. So being able to go around the city and getting those stories helped, I guess, open the school district's eyes of how deep the problems were in the schools for the students feeling safe about from things like racist acts and violence to just general bullying and conflict issues that were going unnoticed in the schools.
I know you were involved with an organization called the Association for Conflict Resolution, and in fact, a couple of years ago, a number of us on the Lower Merion Human Relations Commission were involved in some training that was hosted by that organization. What is that organization, and how are you involved with it?
The Association for Conflict Resolution is it's an international organization that for mediators, arbitrators, basically third-party interveners. Early on, you had also people working in crisis negotiation, etc. They still have that branch, but the bulk of them are mediators and arbitrators who belong to this membership. And regionally, when you referenced the ACR, was a regional, the Greater Philadelphia chapter, where I'm a previous past president for the group, and in our region, it covers Delaware, as in state of Delaware, South Jersey, and the Philadelphia metro region. And we have a membership of mostly mediators of varying backgrounds, practicing various backgrounds of mediation, whether it be family, business, etc., and some arbitrators as well. So it's really just a professional organization. Locally, we try to do programs at least quarterly, bringing some education to people on different topics that are related to the field. But there's also the Pennsylvania Council of Mediators, which the ACR is closely associated with. And in those cases, like in both the PCM and also ACR, I've had opportunities to share some of the trainings I've developed over the years, and in terms of expanding to the professionalism of the field.
Some HRCs, like our neighbor, Haverford Township, have entered into what we call Workshare Agreements with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We at Lower Merion have been exploring this almost since our creation 10 years ago. But I understand the Philadelphia Commission elects not to have such an agreement. Can you explain why that works better for Philadelphia?
Well, the short of it is, like, as I mentioned, like Philadelphia has more protected categories, so it kind of doesn't really make sense for us to, have the work share when, the state doesn't protect many of the categories that we do. The other part is, like, we do have the capacity to do work for our city. So it kind of doesn't really make sense for us to have a standing informal work share agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And we are charged to enforce them as we described before. So we have all the capacities that the state does, plus more protected categories to work with.
So, and also you come out of the mayor's office, and we're a volunteer organization, which I mean, you talk about a staff, we're all volunteers here.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we don't really come out of the mayor's. We're also able to investigate, like, all city agencies too. So it's like we're really an independent. We're a city agency. So yeah, right. So we're not going to go anywhere unless we're voted out by the people.
Right. We only have a couple minutes left. Can you outline for us some of your pet projects or initiatives you're looking at for the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations?
Well, right now in my current position as acting, like, I'm really just trying to make sure we don't, go off track. So nothing too big. However, I will say that, with the recent spike of anti-Asian violence, we've been involved in a lot of like sort of partnering from issuing statements against anti-Asian violence to partnering with various community organizations and also other agencies, both city and state, to work on this issue. Anything from, like, offering sort of know your rights trainings to, like, how to report hate. But again, it's very early on, but and we'll see where it goes.
Well, I thank you so much for taking time out of your, what I'm sure is a very busy schedule, to speak with the neighboring HRC today. I look forward to seeing you again the next time Tri-States gets together, Tri-States Human Relations Coalition gets together. And I want to again express our thanks from the Lower Merion Human Relations Commission for joining us this month.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. And thank you, viewers, for joining us this month. We have more programs scheduled ahead where we talk about what initiatives our own HRC is working on. And until then, thanks for joining us.